Well, let us take the moment that we've all been waiting for to find out who our special guest is. This is a man who is well known in the media circles of print and radio and television. He's a man who's spent quite a bit of his time in this town. Good morning to you, Josh Barnes.
A lovely intro from Snick there. He nailed it, thinking that I wasn't on the lineup.
That's right. If only he knew.
If only I knew. I sort of, and then I talked myself out of it. And but Josh, I've got to say, in all honesty, I'm thrilled to bits to have you on show number 250 as well as being on show number 1, and how immensely proud we are in Geelong of what you've done in your career. And thank you for being part of our career a long time ago.
Yeah, well, don't make it about me. This is a milestone for you guys. You've outlasted Marnus's Test career now. Told for the first time since 1979. You've outlasted them. And you might remember, Neil, you've outlasted Brisbane's Hoodoo in Geelong. That ticked off last night too.
It was, and I have so far, I haven't talked about it on the wireless at all today, have I? I've been very gracious about it.
You've done very, very well so far, Neil. But I wasn't taken aback, but it was a very interesting game of footy, and my goodness, as they kept saying on the broadcast, it's easy to see why this mob are the reigning premiers.
I think there's been a couple of games in recent times where I think Chris Fagan pointed out during the week that we have had, in the last 2 weeks, 22 more shots at goal than our opposition had lost both games. So I think it made a bit of a difference last night when your lot did it and our lot didn't. It's because the three of us, of course, were the first voices on the now defunct GoFooty.live. And I think at that time we used to have a bit of an edict, which was bad kicking is bad football. I don't know if that's ever been used again. Josh, it is a bit about you, though, because we wanted
It's a lot about you,
We wanted
friend.
to talk to you as our probably our most successful graduate of this program. When I first met you, we were both guest appearing on a thing called Sports Fix, which still stumbles along during the summer months. But it's been a journey. At that stage, when I first met you, I think you were still at the Moreland Leader. Am I right?
Yeah, that would have been those days. That's another now defunct publication. That would have been back then, before heading down to Geelong, the Addy, in late 2019. Just got in before that disease started spreading around. And then I was there until 2023, until I moved back up the highway to the Herald Sun. So up and down and up again.
I go back a bit further. I think I first met you at the South Barwon Footy Club, where your father spent a lot of time, and then you were dragged along and played footy there. Played famously in a premiership with a bloke named Stewart, I think, wasn't it?
What was his surname?
Yeah, that Tom Stewart that still goes around at the Cattery, and a few other notables. But even then, I was quite taken by your love of the game, your passion to talk about it, your interest in it, which was similar to me at an age, which I suppose was a bit of an attraction. But you actually did something productive with it. You went off to school, got yourself educated, and you've now reached some good heights. So, it's been a long time. I think you're probably 13 or 14 years old when I met you.
Yeah, I suppose so. I can't remember that day, but I'm sure it was important in both our lives, Snick. But it's been fun. Obviously, as you guys know, there's few things, in case anyone important in my life is listening, there's few things as important as sport, but not many really. It's worth spending as much of your time thinking about it as you can, I think.
And I think I had a pretty privileged moment 6 or 8 weeks ago interviewing Chris Scott at the Geelong and District. No, it was more. It'd be 10 weeks ago. Geelong and District Footy League launch.
He probably won't recognise Scotty.
Yeah, Scotty.
That's who Josh should know him.
So he was there as a special guest, and I had the privilege of having a Q&A with him for about half an hour. And I did mention how you and Mitch Cleary had both cut your teeth doing the GDFNL footy reports in your teens to help start off where you were, and I thought it was relevant to mention you both to Chris as part of what grassroots sport is about. It's not just about the kicking and the catching. There's so many other pieces of it, and of course we remember Chris Scott mentioning you by name in a couple of press conferences, which was also a bit of a proud uncle moment for us, I guess, to see that you had been treated with such respect, and to have him speak so highly of you that night in front of a couple of hundred people connected with the Geelong and District Footy League was a pretty good feeling as well. So again, those sorts of things must sit well with you that you can do this job and do it with integrity.
Oh, well, I like to think so. That's before we even started the Moore League, that's where I really first started in journalism, was standing in the outer at the GDFL, it must have been 2016, I reckon, 16, 15 or so, running around, standing there. It gets very, very cold at 5 p.m. out in the...
Oh, it certainly does.
Ground.
I've got to do it again today.
Senior coach, and you wait for that coach to come out, and they sort of fob you off and don't come out for another 20 minutes, and you're standing out there. It can be very, very chilly waiting out there, but that's where real footy is, and that's, I guess, a great place to cut your teeth as someone. In my profession, you learn a lot more standing out there sometimes than you do standing in the AFL change rooms. You have to do a lot more yourself that way, and you have to pack a better beanie, most important.
Well, I guess the other thing, though, that comes through, and this is not about blowing up your tyres more than anything that we need to, but...
Job of it, though.
The fact that you don't get to where you've got to, which is, national audience on television and all that sort of stuff, without doing the hard yards. I think there's a lot of people who look at some of the alleged radio personalities and TV personalities to get there purely and simply because they were good at kicking a footy around or good at smacking a cricket ball around. The people who are the proper journalists, the proper broadcasters, more often than not have got to where they've got to because, as I think it was Gary Player who said, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah, well, I find in particular when I watch games, I find the journalists and those who have done that job are better in those kind of roles at game day. I always like when there's a journalist doing the boundary writing because they know the right questions to ask. They go and get the information about the injured player. I think they do that, in my opinion, at least better than some of the past players and those who have been sort of shipped in there. It's a skill. It's just like playing at half forward, a different skill to playing at half back. Being a professional journalist in those situations is really important, and I think that kind of thing can be missed sometimes in footy broadcasts, in regular broadcasts, that a lot of people that come in with big names do the work and get there eventually, but it can take some time, and if you have somebody that knows what they're doing on the ground, they can find those stories and find the things that you need to know a lot quicker and easier and deliver it better sometimes than those who have a face that you might recognise.
Well, that was the point Scotty made about you, was that you clearly do research. The questions that Josh asks are coming from a place where he's obviously been to the VFL game and he's watched the game and he's taken note of things that are in the game. So he liked that about you, that you're not looking for a gotcha. You're not looking for that silly, what about that umpiring decision that cost you the game nonsense. He respects the way you research what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I find those settings are very unusual, the coach press conference setting. It's not kind of a situation you're in many walks of life where you sit there peppering questions at someone and they sort of have to answer you and can't get up and leave kind of situation. But I find it's always better to make it a bit more conversational. You have to hope that the person sitting behind the desk in front of the sponsors' logos believes that you're asking a question with good intent, and hopefully you can sort of do it right both ways. I think that's the best way to do it, is to have a relationship that way and try and be respectful both ways, and sometimes have a little bit of fun with it as well.
You want to actually go and listen, you probably don't actually as Geelong supporters, but you want to go and listen to Chris Fagan's press conference last night. There was someone there, during Scotty's press conference last night, there was someone from Canberra, I think, who kept on asking questions, and he said, just one more please, mate, and then moved on. I don't know who she was, it was really quite unusual, but in Fagan's, someone asked him a question, it was like, pretty much give a shit. Like, it wasn't, he must have been really happy with Kyle Lohmann. It was something about, when you brought the ball down through the centre and you cut across at 45, and Chris fucking goes, oh, mate, that's a bit technical. So he'd obviously done his research, that guy. But
I did notice it last night. There was a few technical questions thrown around about tagging and tactics, and so Chris Scott didn't want to go into it too much. So they're kind of tricky, those ones, because I think they're the ones that you probably want to know more. You can always serve up the Dorothy Dixer of the how did you feel about tonight sort of thing to get things going. But once you actually can squeeze something out of a coach about their tactics or their plans, that's when you've done a good job. But it is hard work. They're professionals. They don't give it away too easily. But sometimes it's good to actually talk about the game, which we miss sometimes.
Just on that, Josh, I suggested to Scotty, and he didn't really answer it, but do you sense that the AFL Coaches Association have had a chat to the media about the sort of conversations that take place at conferences? Because on the odd occasion you can actually hear the questions at press conferences. They seem to be a lot more a lot more sensible than they have been in recent years. There's not the silly gotcha stuff that actually drives the coaches crazy. And on the back of that, they're more interesting because the coaches will engage in that conversation because it is actually more, maybe it's too technical last night, but I like the fact that it's getting into what's happened in the game more so than maybe an umpiring decision.
Yeah, well, the initial plan this year, it didn't get off the ground, was to almost separate them a little bit and go in a little bit more detail with the coach press conferences, with the, I guess, the written media is the way to term it, and have a separate piece which is a bit more emotional with the broadcasters. That didn't get off the ground, but I think that kind of plan has sort of filtered down a little bit, that it is a bit more relaxed, or not so much relaxed, but a bit more deep thought thinking than just the emotional stuff. But obviously you have to ask those emotional kind of questions. If there's a big incident or something, you have to ask about that. But I think there has been a bit of a shift. But then it depends on the coach sometimes. I think I was in the Ross Lyon press conference a couple of weeks ago where he and Ronnie Lerner, the journalist with us, had a bit of a tete-a-tete about the crowd numbers, and I'm not sure how respectful that ended up being, but it depends on the coach and the mood of the coach sitting behind the desk.
That's something else I was going to ask you about. I love Chris Scott's conferences and the Chris Fagans of the world because they're interesting. They want to engage in intelligent conversation. And Scott usually finishes up going to places that maybe he didn't even want to go, but they're really interesting. But when you've got a bloke like Ross Lyon or the old days of Mick Malthouse, do you, as a journalist, get a bit intimidated? I think, well, I want to ask him that, but maybe I won't because he might get surly.
Yeah, Ross is a different beast himself. He has a plan going into press conferences. He always spends about 3 minutes answering the first question, trying to run through the game himself, I think in the hope that you don't ask him about other things. And he can sort of distract you. He likes a long answer, particularly after a loss. He likes a very long first answer, and then you can kind of get a bit mesmerised when he actually hasn't said anything. So you have to hold firm on the questions that you actually want to ask him. So he's a bit tricky, but it just depends on their mood. You can gauge when the coaches are finished, they don't want to speak anymore. You can sort of figure out that they don't really want to answer your question. It might not be worth asking, or when you think you need to actually follow up on a question that they didn't answer and actually ask it again. It's a bit of a tricky dance sometimes, and it takes a while, I think, with different coaches to figure out their moods and figure out when you feel like they will want to answer a question, when you think they're being a bit more expansive. As you said, Chris Scott can sort of go down different avenues you never really expect. Sometimes he's extremely expansive and even beyond what you were asking, and then sometimes even he isn't that interested in talking about things at all. Depends on whether they've won or lost and their mood on the night.
Well, my favourite moment of the Chris Fagan press conference last night was this. You just have to bear with me for 5 seconds because this is the journalist asking the question.
Yeah.
Fagan's answer, that is a really good question, yes. To this day, I don't know what the question was, but boy, oh boy, it was a good question. So, Marnsey, talking about your career, obviously one of the major changes I would have thought is when you sit in the solitude of your laptop typing away, or you sit in an environment like this where people don't realise that Rob Cameron is in fact one of the most handsome men in the world because they don't ever get to see him, suddenly you find yourself thrust into the television world, and you're a handsome looking fella yourself, but I would suggest on a scale of 1 desperately shy to 10 being gregarious and outgoing, I'd put you a sort of a 3 or 4. You're at the shy end of the spectrum a little bit. How does that translate when you've then got to do TV?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first episode I did on the Midweek Tackle on Fox Footy, you can watch that at 7:30 Tuesday, everybody. The first episode I did was the day after allegations of workplace mistreatment were launched against a Collingwood CEO, and I didn't want to say anything, so I sat as far back away from the desk as I possibly could for the first 20 minutes, too scared to say anything in case I get sued. So it can be a little bit tricky, but that show in particular is quite simple. I think the theory is that we're supposed to be sitting at a desk like we would be in the office, and we just talk to each other. There's not that much TV craft in there for me to remember and forget, so that can be a little bit easier when you're just talking to each other and you sort of get into the rhythm of things. But it is different. Radio and TV are both obviously different in print. Once you say something, you can't take it back on both radio and TV. But TV in particular, you don't know where to look. You don't know sort of who you should be talking to. You don't know when to butt in because people can see that you're sort of trying to get your questions off. So it can be a little bit trickier. no, it just takes, I guess, time and repetition, which hopefully I can get more of down the line. It's an interesting beast. I think once you get into the stages of standing and talking to cameras and all that sort of stuff, you have to memorise things a bit better. I just read off my notes half the time, so it's going to be a work in progress, I'm sure.
Josh, let's go way back to that 13 and 14-year-old Josh Barnes that I met. You obviously had influences. You love the game, games. You love writing about sport. But who were people that inspired you back in those days to help get where you are today?
And please don't embarrass us by saying Rob and me.
No. I'm a little bit higher up the pole.
Oh, okay.
It's a good question. When I think about that, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I can't really remember who I read in those days in the papers. I read the paper every single day. I'm sure the journalists in the Addy and the Herald Sun in those years in the mid-2000s were fantastic. I just can't remember the names of them that well. So no offence to those guys if they're listening, but I would have picked up a lot from that. I would have read definitely the back section of the Addy every day. And then definitely I think sort of TV commentary and TV production and that sort of stuff, you soak that in as a kid. You watching Saturdays on Channel 10 in those days, watching that religiously, and then you'd run out into the backyard and kick the footy out and pretend you were Anthony Hudson or Tim Lane. I think those sort of things soaked in from the start. And I did a lot of that, running around pretending I was playing and doing fake careers in the backyard, that sort of stuff. So that's what I remember most. I'm not sure when it sort of flipped into actual journalism and who was the first inspirations for me as a teenager. I'm not sure who I sort of picked up, but definitely as a kid it was sort of TV. You remember who was on the TV and what they were saying. You sort of recreate that, kicking the ball at the fence in the backyard.
The other thing I wanted to ask is, and I don't expect names, but now that you're working your way up through the world, you would have seen people around you in the industry now. And there's some of them, I know from conversations off air, there'll be some of them I know you don't like that much or don't respect their style that much. Is it helping you to craft who you are by avoiding wanting to be like someone who's perhaps not so good at it?
They're all very good at it, just in their own way. I think I'm learning a lot about the different types of journalists, and all journalists you see are good at their own perspective and their own profession, I suppose. So the TV journalists are generally very good at hunting down news, and it's something I definitely need to get better at, but I enjoy the game perhaps a little bit more than the news around it, so that's something I'm trying to focus on. But news is always super important, so you have to hunt news and chase news all the time. So sort of balancing out the bits and pieces you can learn from different people and how they get their different stories, who they speak to, how to get a good story out of somebody. You learn a lot of that. I think every journalist has their good sides, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see them in the media. They all have very good parts of their profession. I'm sure every single one of us also has parts that we're not so good at, we wish we were better at. Definitely I have a lot of parts I wish I was better at. But
yeah, well, being obnoxious is one I hope you avoid.
And the other tip, I'm trying to help you develop as a journalist. The other option you can do is make stuff up. There's quite a lot of them who have become successful based on that.
Yeah, well, for those who are listening and getting the comments on my stories online, I do make up 50% of things.
I've started going with, when you're writing something and I'm sending a note, I just go, come on, Barnesy. That's just, so if you, with the moderation of those comments, if you see a come on, Barnesy from O'Neill, you'll know it's me.
Well, from a reader's perspective, I don't know if you've met Peter Hanlon, lives at Birregurra, former Age journalist. He's one he's really good at writing the stories within the stories, the little bits and pieces about the not so highly spoken about. It's easy to write stories about Dangerfield and Selwood, everyone does them, but it's the little, the unknowns that are the real gems, I reckon, and you've tended to do a bit of that. Is that a style you might keep with?
Yeah, definitely. I guess the tricky parts, particularly in professional sports, is I guess guardrails these days. There's more media managers than there are journalists these days, which means it's sort of trickier to get around them, for want of a better term. They try and help you sometimes, and sometimes they get blocked themselves, and that can be a tricky part when you think you've got a good story to tell and you can't quite get to the person to tell it. That's a hard part of journalism these days, but those kind of stories are the ones that I definitely enjoy reading. And they have better shelf life. And Peter Hanlon wrote a really, really good one only a few weeks ago about, I think it was a grand final in Colac or down that way.
Yeah.
It was quite a long, long time ago. It's a story that I guess didn't have to be told, but it was told in a perfect way. And in the end, it sort of felt like it had to be told.
Intertwined some big names, but the message was about the concussion in modern sport and the difference 40 years ago to now. But I think it was brilliantly done for that reason. It's intertwined Jonathan Brown and Wayne Schwass, both superstars of the game, and their journey. It was quite amazing. Really good work.
Yeah, and they're the kind of stories that you can pitch to somebody and they think, I don't think this is that interesting or it's that pressing, but then by the time you've written it, the people who read it think, why wasn't I reading this weeks ago?
Yeah.
The kind of story you're after is those ones where you can find the nuggets and find the really interesting stories that haven't been told or feel like they need to be out there for some reason or other that aren't always that pressing and that important at the time.
Barnesy, we could sit here and chat all morning as we've done over the journey, but sadly, as you know, there are deadlines on running sheets and stuff like that. It didn't seem right to do 250 without having you here. You have probably been, whilst Grant Bench is our current third bloke, you've kind of been the third bloke because you've probably appeared on this show more than anybody else over the journey. So thank you for your contribution along the way, and all power to you as you go on to take on the world in journalism.
And thank you. I appreciate all your help, both of you. It's always been great to be part of the show and to help out whenever I can. And it's great to see the show flowering on without me. It's good that it continues on. Mate, another 250 up. You can chase down Brian Lara's 501, I think.
That's it. Rob did say off air, he said, haven't we flourished since Barnesy nicked off? No, he didn't. I made that up.
Josh, all seriousness, I'm very proud of you, mate. I'm just thrilled to bits to see where you've got it. It hasn't surprised me one bit. You come from good stock, and good morning to the Barnes family as well, who I'm sure are listening. Great people, and we're really proud of you, mate. Best wishes.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Josh Barnes from the Herald Sun and Fox Footy, and I even believe he's on the ABC occasionally.
He's on the ABC of a morning.
Speaking of making stuff up, we'll talk to you another time, Barnesy.
See ya.